The Hope Chest by Karen Schwabach. All of her life, Violet had accepted that her parents made decisions, and whether Violet liked it or not, that was the way things were. But this was too much. The letters had been written just for her, by Chloe, the only person in the family who had ever told her anything except how to behave. And she hadn't stolen them. They'd been stolen from her. It was completely unfair, and Violet wasn't going to put up with it. The Hope Chest by Karen Schwabach. To Veronica and Jessica Schwabach, may their votes always count. Stolen Letters, Chapter 1. Give those to me at once, young lady. Violet dropped the bundle of letters and looked up at her mother's angry face. She felt guilty, but only for a second. They're mine, she said. They're my letters, from my sister. They're addressed to me. Mother made a grab for the bundle, and the two of them struggled, each gripping the letters with one fist. Mother used the other hand to try to pull Violet away from the desk by her pigtails, and Violet used the other hand to wrench her pigtails free. It was very unladylike, not at all graceful. How dare you, Mother cried, going through my desk drawers. Violet Mayhew, I thought I'd brought you up better than that. You hid them, Violet screamed, managing to jerk her hair and a few of the letters free. She lurched against her mother's desk, knocking over a vase of asters and a dreadful old hair wreath in a wooden frame. She retreated to the bedroom doorway. I bet Chloe's been writing to me for the whole time, since you threw her out, and you let me think she'd forgotten all about me. Violet, you know perfectly well your father and I always do what is best for you. Mother had decided to be calm and firm, but there were tears in the corner of her eyes. Violet didn't care. She was too mad to care. You hid Chloe's letters from me for 3 whole years. You stole them from me. Violet retreated to the door. Heavy footsteps thudded up the stairs behind her. Violet turned around and saw Father. It was his newspaper reading time, and Violet and Mother had disturbed it. What in the name of Sam Hill is going on here? Father demanded. I'm sorry, Arthur, said Mother. Violet has stolen some letters from my desk drawer. Violet backed up against the hall mirror. Father towered. He was broad and massive, like the bank where he worked. He had left his jacket downstairs, but he still looked imposing in the black broadcloth vest and trousers and the spotless white shirt with the high starched collar. He glared down at Violet through his gold-trimmed glasses. Why aren't you downstairs reading to your brother? He demanded. Violet had no good reason. She had sat with Stephen, but hadn't bothered to read to him since she finished all her Oz books. Instead, she had written a letter to her cousin, and had been looking through Mother's desk for a stamp when she found the letters. Give those back to your mother at once, young lady, said Father. They're addressed to me, Violet said. From Chloe. She shifted toward the hall corner, toward the dog's leg turn that led to the back stairway. Standing up to her father was a lot scarier than standing up to her mother, partly because he so seldom spoke to her. I won't, she said. Then give them to me, Father held out his hand. At once, young lady, you're going to be in so much trouble, it will make your head spin. I don't care, said Violet. And she didn't. She was madder than she had ever been in her life. Then they told her to be seen and not heard, and to speak only when spoken to. They sent her sister away and stuck her with a brother who wouldn't even talk. They hid her own letters from her and called it stealing when she found them. It was wretched that just because a person happened to be 11 years old, that person didn't have any say in things at all. Not even about getting to read her own letters. Father moved toward Violet, a huge, threatening tower of authority. Mother seemed to disappear from Violet's field of vision. Father always had a way of making Mother disappear. Violet darted around the corner and clattered down the curving back staircase and out through the kitchen, where Eleanor, the cook, was making boiled custard. She slammed the screen door and ran all the way to the banks of the Susquehanna River. She had only grabbed a few letters from the middle of the stack. The postmark on the first letter was from 1918, 2 years ago. She sat down at her favorite spot under an old elm tree that grew on the riverbank and began to read. New York City, Saturday, November 9th, 1918. Dear Violet, well, I voted. It was nothing like Father warned me. There were no gangs of hoodlums standing at the top of the steps to throw down voters from the opposition party. I did not lose my femininity. I didn't have to drag my skirts through the mud and muck of national politics. My skirts are 8 inches from the ground, and the muck of national politics turned out to be not that deep this year. There were thousands of women voting, and yet New York did not have a Bolshevist revolution. Not yet, anyway. It's only been a few days. Did the false armistice happen in Susquehanna, too? Thursday, the newsboy here out on the streets hollering that the war was over. I was treating influenza patients on the 5th floor of a tenement house, and everybody dashed down the stairs out into the streets, cheering and throwing their hats in the air. But then it turned out to be not true, of course. Everyone says the war can't last much longer now. A lot of countries in Europe have given women the vote now, you know. Some of them have only given it to women whose sons were killed in the war. That makes me really angry. As if women are only as good as men if their sons die. But the United States doesn't even have that. At least women can vote in New York State now. That makes 16 states plus the territory of Alaska. Ah, Alaska. Speaking of soldiers, how is Stephen doing? I hope you aren't reading the war news to him. I know Father always says that's what he'll want to hear, but somehow that doesn't seem very likely to me. Write if you can. My address is in the envelope. Your loving sister, Chloe. Violet smiled because the letter sounded so much like Chloe. And Alaska. Chloe had always wanted to go to Alaska. She had taken out every book in the library about Alaska. She had drawn Violet a picture of the Eskimo driving a dog sled. Violet had asked for an igloo, too. But Chloe had said that the Alaskan Eskimos didn't live in igloos. Violet looked at the envelope. The address was somewhere in New York City. Henry Street. The next letter gave her a jolt. November 20th, 1918. Dear Violet, I can't tell you how sorry I am about Flossie. You know Father wouldn't let me in to see you. Don't you? I drove up as soon as I heard about it from Cousin Helen, and was in Susquehanna the next morning. Had to stop in Scranton overnight after the Hope Chest blew a tire. It's second on the trip, and it was too dark to change it. Mother wanted to let me in, I think, but Father said no, and all I could think of was you, all alone, upstairs, in your bedroom, with your thoughts. I wish I could call, but even if I had enough money for long distance, Father would just hang up. Write to me, all right? I want to know how you're doing. And wear your face mask every time you go out so you don't get the flu. Love, Chloe. Violet felt a sharp twist in her stomach. Reading the letter made her feel as if her best friend, Flossie, had just died yesterday, instead of almost 2 years ago. It had happened right near where she was sitting now, on the banks of the Susquehanna. She and Flossie were playing Nellie Bly. Nellie Bly was a newspaper reporter who reported the war from the trenches of the Western Front. And Flossie wanted to grow up to be just like her. So that day, they were playing that Flossie was Nellie Bly and Violet was a captured German soldier. Only suddenly, Flossie had complained of a backache. And then she had gotten a nosebleed. And Violet had said, "Your ear's bleeding, Flossie." And by the time she had helped Flossie home, Flossie was bleeding out of both ears and her nose and couldn't talk. That was the influenza. Like getting run over by a steam train. Not just sniffles, but blood pouring out of your nose and ears. People didn't understand how the disease could hit so hard, could kill so many people, when it was only the flu. Except that after 1918, it would never be only the flu again. Violet clenched the letter in her hands and was furious. At Mother and Father, it was those awful bleak days after Flossie died. It would have meant a lot to have Chloe sitting at the foot of her bed again, talking to her and telling her stories. She couldn't believe Mother and Father had sent Chloe away when Violet needed her, just because Chloe was a new woman who wanted to vote and have a job of her own. She was still Chloe. Violet read the next letter. December 1st, 1918. Dear Violet, how are you? The influenza is really bad here. I treated 85 patients in the tenements behind Hester Street yesterday. I start at the bottom of one building and work my way up, calling on patients, and when I get to the roof, I step across onto the next building and work my way down. Don't worry, there's no space in between the buildings. I called on one family where the mother, father, and 6 children were all sick in one little room and all huddled up into one bed. None of them spoke any English. So far, I haven't gotten the flu, touch wood, because I'm careful to wear my mask all the time. Are you wearing yours? They also gave all of us public health nurses an inoculation at the Henry Street Settlement house. But we think it's a placebo, a fake shot, to make us think we're protected. The other night, I had a funny accident. I was coming home in the dark after seeing 107 patients, and I crashed right into a young man carrying a shovel. We both went sprawling into the gutter, which was not exactly clean. I guess there are more horses than motor cars in New York. It turned out the poor fellow had been digging graves, which is a pretty good job these days. Anyway, he was very polite and forgiving and walked me home. Please write and let me know how you're doing. I think about you all the time. Love, Chloe. The letter started stupid tears in Violet's eyes again, and she dashed them away with the sleeve of her midday blouse. She thought about Chloe all the time, too. So that was what Chloe was doing, being a public health nurse. During the huge scene after Chloe bought the Hope Chest, Chloe had shouted something about wanting to do something meaningful with her life. Mother had cried and asked her what wasn't meaningful about marrying an up-and-coming man like Mr. Russell or Mr. Rice and having beautiful babies. Violet, listening on the stairs, knew just what Chloe meant. At school, Violet's class was knitting squares to make blankets for French war orphans. Miss Smedley read to the class Ivanhoe, and what she was reading to them just then for a half an hour each day while they knitted. And although Miss Smedley tried to make a game of it by keeping score of who knitted more squares, the boys or the girls, to Violet, knitting those squares seemed like the most important thing she had ever done in her life. She felt as if she had been part of something huge, something vital, something that involved the whole world, or at least much more of the world than she had ever seen. Mr. Rice, or was it Mr. Russell? Had a very high opinion of women working or voting, or doing anything interesting. Both Mr. R worked for Father at the bank, and they still came on Sunday dinner every week. Even though Chloe was no longer around for either of them to marry, last Sunday they had tried to outdo each other, making jokes about women voting. Can you imagine if women were actually allowed to vote? Mr. Russell asked. Elections would have to go on for days. All of those women standing in the voting booths, not being able to make up their minds? Not only that, but they'd be standing on their little tippy toes trying to peer into the other booths to see who the other women were voting for, said Mr. Rice. Violet couldn't imagine why Mother and Father had thought Chloe would marry either of them. She eagerly unfolded the next letter. December 20th, 1918. Dear Violet, Merry Christmas. I've been thinking about you a lot. I wish I could come to see you for Christmas, but Father would just slam the door in my face again. So it would be a waste of gasoline. At more than 20 cents a gallon, did I tell you the Hope Chest gets 25 miles to the gallon, though? It's great. The influenza seems to be spreading a little less this week. Touch wood. I hope you are still well. A friend of mine was very bad with it. But he's better now, and I think he will live. It was scary, though. The federal government has started deporting foreign-born radicals to Russia. Can you imagine? A lot of them didn't even come from Russia. Some of them have lived in this country nearly all their lives. But I guess that's what happens when you have a war. People start hating immigrants. I think there are people who just need someone to hate. I just hope they don't deport all of them. Some of them are such dear people. I hope you can come to New York City one day. You never saw a place so alive, so many different ideas being talked about in so many different languages. New York City is a college education itself. Still, I hope that you are at least well. I hope that you, at least, will find a way to go to college. And I mean a whole 4 years of it. Love, Chloe. Violet put the letter down and looked out at the muddy waters of the Susquehanna slipping by. Chloe made what their mother had always called the wrong sort of people sound really interesting, which Violet always suspected they might be. She made them sound downright uplifting. Wasn't it just like their parents to want to keep Violet away from anything interesting? Chloe was wrong about Violet finding a way to go to college, though. Violet didn't want to go to college. School was boring, and the sooner she was out of it, the better. Besides, Father was against college for girls. The next thing in the pile wasn't a letter, but a slender tin-framed snapshot. Stephen and Chloe, when they were teenagers, sat stiffly in their Sunday best and held Violet, who wore a white dress with enormous skirts that covered both their laps. She had been a plain baby, Violet thought, just like she was a plain girl, with straight brown hair that had never curled, never would, and a snub nose and ordinary brown eyes. Mother must have stuck the picture in the pile of letters. But why? So that she would remember what Chloe looked like? Or was she trying to hide Chloe so she would forget her? January 15th, 1919. Dear Violet, Happy New Year. I would have written sooner, but there have been some bad relapses of flu cases, as well as some other things that have been keeping me very busy. I hope you were thinking about what I said about college. I know it seems far away when you're in 4th grade. College arms you to fight the great battles. I learned this from Miss Lillian Wald. She's the founder of the Henry Street Settlement House, where I'm doing my nurse training. She invented public health nursing, you know. She says influenza has been a baptism by fire for all of her trainees. I hope I never see anything worse. Speaking of battles, it looks as though Congress is going to take up the Susan B. Anthony Amendment when it reconvenes. That's the amendment poor Miss Anthony wrote back in 1878. Congress voted it down then. I think women could have gotten the vote 40 years ago. It needs a 2/3 vote of both houses of Congress to pass, which means it's going to be a huge knockdown, drag-out fight. And Congress defeated it before. If they do pass it, it will go on to the states for ratification, and then it will be part of the U.S. Constitution. Part of me really wants to go to Washington to help Miss Alice and Paul and the National Women's Party work for that amendment. But I also want to stay here and finish my nursing training, especially now that my baptism of fire is over. Touch wood and cross fingers. There are other things that make me want to stay in New York too, but a woman shouldn't let herself be ruled by those sorts of things. Love, Chloe. Violet couldn't figure out what the last 2 sentences of the letter meant. Chloe's life in New York sounded thrilling. Violet imagined Chloe climbing up and down the towering tenement buildings, risking death by influenza or falling off a roof, or to bring help and hope to hundreds of suffering people. It sounded a lot more exciting than marrying one of the Mr. R's. Violet eagerly opened the next letter. February 18th, 1919. Dear Violet, you still haven't written back to me. I hope you're not still angry with me for leaving. You know, I really couldn't do anything else. I didn't want to marry Mr. Russell, or whoever else they found for me. and turn into a good little hempy, hosting dinner parties and having babies, and never again having a thought or idea or dream of my own. I wonder if Mother ever had a dream before she married Father. Well, it's too late for me to ask her now. Last week I drove the Hope Chest out to Long Island with some girls from the worst tenements on Hester Street. None of them have ever seen an open field before. They couldn't believe all the space. I wish you could have been with us. The Hope Chest got 2 flat tires, one on the way there and one on the way back. But fortunately, a friend of mine showed me how to patch them myself. Everyone agrees that a lady motorist should know how to change a tire. But considering how often they burst, I'm glad I know how to patch them now as well. Some people think that suffragists, or is it suffragists, hate men, but that's not true at all. Lots of men are really nice, like my friend who showed me how to patch tires. There's a difference between liking men and wanting to have them run your whole life. Well, that's neither here nor there. I hope you're getting along all right. I remember that when I was in 8th grade and my friend Dottie Armitage died of consumption, I didn't want to be friends with anyone else for a long time. I thought that would somehow be disloyal to Dottie. It wasn't true, though. I hope you know this isn't true about Flossie either. When a friend dies, some of her always stays inside of us. Write back if you can. Love, Chloe. Violet felt peculiar. It was as if Chloe had read her mind. Back then, that is. She had felt just that way, when her grief started to ease enough that she could sometimes laugh and have fun and want to be with people again. She felt as if she had been betraying Flossie. If she made other friends, Violet threw the letter angrily down the riverbank beside her. It would have been great to read this letter back then. The last letter was just a note. April 15th, 1919. Dear Violet, this clipping is a poem that was in the newspaper the other day. It's called Aftermath, and it's by a man named Siegfried Sassoon, who was in the British Army. I wished you'd read it to Stephen. You know there's going to be a League of Nations. Everyone says we will have a war again. I hope that's true. Violet looked at the envelope, but there was no clipping. Either it had fallen out, or Mother had taken it when she had read the letter. That was what made Violet snap. Mother had read all these letters, maybe Father too, but it was Mother who she felt ought to have known better. Mother had kept Chloe's interesting news and comforting thoughts from Violet, when Violet had needed them most. And there were more letters besides these few that Violet had managed to rescue. Violet knew they wouldn't be in the desk anymore. They'd be hidden somewhere. She couldn't find them, or even burned. All her life, Violet had accepted that her parents made decisions, and whether Violet liked it or not, that was the way things were. But this was too much. The letters had been written just for her by Chloe, the only person in the family who had ever told her anything except how to behave. And she hadn't stolen them. They had been stolen from her. It was completely unfair, and Violet wasn't going to put up with it.